Hi, this is our Green Page podcast. Today we're going to be presenting 10 articles. I'm Emma, and I will be presenting It May Be Time to Stop Using Glitter, as well as stage design in fatal Radiohead concert collapse called for parts that didn't exist, witness says.
I'm the other Emma, and I'll be presenting the importance of the National Endowment for the Arts, how to be greener on Broadway and everywhere else, and Trump repeals OSHA safety standards.
Hi, I'm Shazad, and I'll be talking about comments, update futures, debate over unpaid internships, James Corden on romance and sex scenes for plus-size people, and after Overture cancels Miss Saigon panel, Asian American scholars host teach-in on street.
I'm Chris, and I'll be talking about the World Theater Day 2019 and All This Town's a Stage.
So starting off with It May Be Time to Stop Using Glitter. We all know that glitter is just about the worst thing to ever be introduced to this industry, really. And, it came after the European Union banned single-use plastic straws, and everybody's banning plastic bags and styrofoam. And glitter is just a microplastic that pollutes everything, including our lives, really. And as it breaks down into chemicals that are linked with hormone disruption in humans and animals, once they enter our kind of food chain. And just the outright ban on glitter is really, in my opinion, justified. Scientists are divided on it, however. Some think that it's harmful for the environment and just as dangerous as other microplastics, while others just say there isn't enough research. And just as far as options go of what can we do to avoid glitter, the first option presented by the article is you cannot buy it. And then also there are biodegradable forms of glitter, but the cons to those is they're significantly more expensive, and there isn't quite enough research to prove that they're actually better. Also, one of the biggest alternatives is called mica, and it's incredibly controversial because apparently it's mind-using child labor.
Child labor?
All right.
Wow.
So what are your opinions on glitter?
I mean, I feel like we try to avoid glitter in this industry at all costs, almost regardless of its environmental impact, because it's just annoying and hard to work with and inconsistent, but
I like glitter. I personally think it's like a great addition to anything, and I do love the look of it. It sucks that it is environmentally unfriendly, but so are a lot of things.
So, did the article go into saying anything about a secondary type of, or maybe there's a biodegradable option or some option that is, not going to negatively impact the environment?
There are a few, but they're really significantly more expensive for the most part. And just the accessibility to the scale that I guess theater does want is just not practical for most places.
I think what would be necessary is a glitter that can just dissolve, kind of like salt. And I actually am not opposed to using salt on stage, shiny salt.
shiny salt.
As a glitter substitute.
Does shiny salt exist?
I mean, you could get salts that are
Yeah, it's called diamonds.
diamonds. Okay. So can we use diamonds
There's
on
one
stage?
option, definitely.
I think that the new glitter for theater is the more affordable diamond option.
Clearly, that is one way to approach it.
But I mean, kind of going off of that, one could make the argument that no matter what amount of glitter the theater industry uses, it's still nothing compared to any other industry that uses glitter at a large scale. The clothing industry or the craft industry are so to be using and consuming glitter at a much higher rate than theater. So I guess there's that is it even worth it question, but I don't know what's worse in the environmental degradation that comes from glitter or child labor issues. So
yeah, it really doesn't seem like this article really presents the solution. It's just
it really doesn't. It just says this is bad and we should have a solution.
Yeah,
it also brings up a couple beauty product companies that do use glitter, and one of them in particular said that instead of washing it down the sink, you should like wipe it off with a cloth. But how reasonable is that? Because most studies show that it just eventually washes into waterways and causes the same damage. So really, just there isn't a solution.
The wash.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like the name of the game for the like green movement right now, especially in our industry, is just presenting challenges with no real solutions yet, and not enough research has been done to come up with good alternatives.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Ready to move on?
Yeah, I think that's enough
Yeah.
for her.
So kind of actually going off of that, the article I'm going to talk about is How to Be Greener on Broadway and Everywhere Else. This is an article presented by Local 802 from AFM. And it talks about the Broadway Green Alliance and what it is, and the Broadway Green captains for this local, and what suggestions they have for how to make a hashtag green resolution on Earth Day. Some of them are bring your own coffee mug or thermos when you're headed to your favorite coffee shop. Dedicate yourself to recycling. Eat less meat or participate in Meatless Monday. Try composting food waste. Go digital and sign up for paperless billing. Commit to riding your bike to work once a week. Buying non-toxic cleaning products. And carrying reusable silverware with you so you never have to use plastic cutlery. And that was it. And so the title's a little misleading, How to Be Greener on Broadway, since it doesn't talk at all in any way, shape, or form about specifically how Broadway can be greener, and gave very, very generic suggestions for how to be greener, quote, everywhere else. Yeah, the article really had no substance at all whatsoever.
I would almost be willing to argue that, like, especially that first one about the reusable cups and mugs and things, so many workplaces now actually have, like, their own coffee machines or whatever you need, so people do that anyways, or the company actually just has a ton of mugs that are shared.
Yeah.
And, like, that one always bugs me, because I feel like we've reached a point where oftentimes that is true. Most
Like,
people do
I
that.
feel like you could like bang on the mug argument all you want, but like as long as people still are drinking out of plastic water bottles and plastic things, that's not going to change. But like for example, over the summer at my internship, we had mugs for every single person. I actually spent like a good couple of hours with a label maker making everyone a label for their mugs. But I think that's a great thing. I think that there should be a lot more people, a lot more companies that just kind of say, "Hey, welcome to work. Here's a mug." Like that would be kind of nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of reminded me of the Green Theater project that we do in TD3, and like the fact that no one actually really knows how to make Broadway greener. They just keep saying do it, and then give stupid suggestions like this, like going paperless in the rehearsal room. And the paper you waste in the rehearsal room is 1/1000th of the environmental impact that a piece of scenery has.
I think specifically in theater, like we're gonna start to see like a force towards being more green, just because of like there was an article, I don't remember when it was up, but it basically was talking about how expensive the materials are getting, and just how expensive it is, even like more so in like the construction industry and permanent structures, and how much it's affecting just the cost of consumables. But in theater in particular, it actually might be a good thing, because we're gonna have to theaters are gonna have to figure out ways to start reusing material, and not treating it as a disposable, but more so treating it as something that's going to be an inventoried item. So I think when we see the lumber start to increase, theaters in particular, and I mean really entertainment as a whole, is really going to have to start adjusting the way they use that consumable, which I think will in turn make a positive impact or force positive change.
And I think, to be fair to this article, this is from the American Federation of Musicians. So like the impact that they have on the Broadway environmental impact is very small, because for them, a lot of their impact is like electricity in their equipment, and that's kind of even more on the sound design side of things anyway. And then like the paper they print their sheet music on. So I guess it kind of makes sense that going paperless would be one of their like tenets for how to make Broadway greener.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing that I think the article kind of covered it all is that they have the ability to kind of have a ripple effect when it comes to like setting the tone for how not just Broadway but just like theater in general, like because like we always hear we always talk about it here, like, oh, if they're doing something on Broadway, we should do that too. And I think that ripple effect as to like, oh, if this like greener thing is working on Broadway, like goes out into other theaters, but I don't think that them focusing on mugs and cups is gonna be that. It's okay. That's pretty good.
So since they're union members, right? What was the local?
It's local 802, but they're with AFM, so they're musicians. They're
Yeah. So like, is there, if they actually want to go down this avenue of going paperless or whatnot, like who's going to pay for the technology that's going to allow them to go paperless? Is that something that's going to have to get written into their contracts, or do you think that's something that's going to have to, like they're going to have to provide themselves, like if they, let's say they just go with iPads or something like that?
Well, in the article they don't really talk about it in terms of a production context. They talk about it in terms of like choosing with your bank to go paper, like in a personal context. They don't talk about production at all.
So
like
it's more about like a moral.
So I don't really know like if the musicians union wanted to go paperless, how they could write that in. But I imagine it'd have to be a part of their
That would just be
contract.
pretty difficult to enforce, just because of the initial investment that it would take to then get to a point where you're actually paperless, true paperless.
Yeah.
I mean, I think maybe if you get a trend going, or you have, the theater spaces are paying for, each, their orchestra or whatever it may have you, they'll have just a inventory of devices that can then act as like their house sheet, music sheet, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's also challenging because a lot of older people would have a really difficult time navigating that.
Yeah.
So you'd have to like build in time, or like some poor intern to have to handle challenges that would come with that. And that would be a really difficult thing to navigate.
Yeah, no, I think we're still several years away from a really paperless solution for theater in general, and like sheet music in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because you sure you can iPad it, but like it's unreliable.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that enough for?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. The article I looked at was about basically unpaid internships. So it kind of focused in on the architecture world. So in particular, they talked about the designer Junya Ishigami and how he has unpaid internships, and the article basically is a whole bunch of quotes coming from various different people with various different opinions, and it kind of has this big generational gap. And I think that we're kind of skewed when it comes to like theater in general, because I feel like in the architecture world, it is very normal. This is being paid for an internship is the norm. Being unpaid is foolery. Like that's kind of like the world of architecture, in the world of pretty much almost any other industry but ours. I say that, but I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of places where like there's unpaid internships, and like this article kind of goes in on like it compares it to like apprentices during the like medieval times, where people would just kind of like be around an artist, and like they're basically being paid in like not screen time, but what's the word where you're just like exposure to it. And some people on this article will say stuff like, I never got paid back in the day for my internships, none of my friends did, we never complained, today's kids are just soft. But then other people will say like, stop acting like it's an honor for a young student to step into your studio or your presence. So it just I just wanted to kind of know your thoughts on it, because I feel like this is something that hits home for all of us, just because we all do it.
Yeah, I mean, the federal government lays out pretty clear guidelines for what can and cannot be considered an unpaid internship, and like I don't know what the architecture world is like, but like I know in theater, like 90% of our unpaid internships are illegal. Even like even ones that give you a stipend, unless they're matching hourly minimum wage, because 90% of interns' work is considered essential to running the company, it's all illegal anyway. Like most internships, because that's one of the tenets, is you can't have an unpaid internship unless all of the unpaid interns could leave the company and the company could still continue business as usual. And that's not the case for most interns in the theater world.
Yeah, especially for like summer stocks.
Exactly, like who pride themselves on running off intern labor.
Exactly.
Like the number of times I've interviewed for an internship and they say, well, our interns are the backbone of our company, as though that's a good thing, but then they pay $100 every 2 weeks.
Or like $0.
Or $0, and they ask you to pay to be there.
Yeah.
And that's just, you know, like they're proud about the fact that their internship is technically illegal, even though they don't really think about it like that.
And I think something that's really big with the generational gap is like, all these adults are like, I didn't get paid, like, this is a step, but like, if someone died from a disease, does that mean we shouldn't cure the disease?
Yeah.
Like, we should try and make it better for people that follow us, and like, there is a way to do that, and we should be doing that. And it's just a really, like, it's a weird thing to navigate, because even if you are paid a stipend, usually this stipend is too small to cover whatever you're paying to live there for the summer if they're not also providing you housing. So it's just like a really difficult situation to be in all around.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's one of those things where like, it's hard to justify just because like, a lot of places justify it as an experience and they value that experience at X amount of dollars, which then they translate into a monetary value essentially, which is your compensation, which I find very hard to believe just because, you know, typically when you're going into a job or specifically an internship, the expectation is that you're going to learn and take away from that, and like to then on top of that put a monetary value on that is a little unrealistic, especially in today's day and age. I think that like I remember I commented on this article and I said that I think like a pretty decent solution would be is like, I know that there are companies out there that just can't afford to pay their interns. That's part of the reason, especially in theater, why we see so low such low compensation and stipend. But I think that like there is money there, and you just like it should be the responsibility of the theater or of the organization to find those funds. You know, whether it be grants. I know here at CMU we have, you know, grants that are available for students to actually go do unpaid internships. But I mean, that should be on the organization to seek out those grants and to essentially to compensate what they can't. Because quite frankly, it shouldn't be your responsibility to find money as you're working. I mean, that just seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, like something that the article kind of pointed out was that like people, they pointed out like the daddy's money thing is especially in the world of architecture, as in like there's already so many jobs that are being like handed to people via like nepotism or like whoever their parents know, that like the second you get an opportunity to work with this accomplished architect, you can't do it because you can't afford to just like dip into some funds and lose money to maybe someday make it back. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, there's a little bit of that in theater too.
Yeah.
You know, we see that kind of the same thing, like the people who can afford to do unpaid internships, like the people who can afford to do unpaid internships, and then
Yeah.
you know, you see major companies who have a real problem with diversity, especially in their intern workforce, because nobody can afford, you know, the people who can afford to do an unpaid internship are all coming from one specific social class, and like that affects how diversity enters into this industry in a very real way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay.
Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right, so I'll talk about All This Town's a Stage. It's my first article. Essentially, it started in 1953 by Tom Patterson. It's in Stratford, Ontario, and essentially what it is basically there's it's April to October, so I think it's a seven months. Essentially, they just have there's a 18,000 seat theater that they basically just put in rep, and the town is really small, kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it really brings together not only the community, but people all around the country and the world, basically for this festival that they put on, and they just talk about how, you know, it says here they sell 500,000 tickets, but the town really only has 30,000 people in it. So it's kind of just this amazing culmination of, you know, community, the arts, and yeah. So I think it's like a really cool thing. a really cool initiative that started. Obviously, it's been going on for a really long time. It's gotten a lot of traction in the community and around the surrounding areas. And you know, the success is really given to the community that started it, just because of how much work they put in, and you know, the countless hours that they're putting towards this, you know, initiative. But I think it also goes to show that, you know, it really pays back with, you know, the amount of people that are coming out and seeing it, the, you know, the tourism that they get. They talk, like, it talks a lot about how the restaurants in the city are, you know, packed, the sidewalks are packed, you know, at 8 o'clock when all the when the show starts. It's kind of like the city turns into a ghost town, really, because everybody is, you know, watching the art. So I think it's cool, and I think it'd be cool to hear what other people think about, you know, this type of initiative and what this is doing, and how they were really, like, what was really the reason that this was able to gain so much traction, and why there are other parts around the country and the world that are having such a difficult time filling their seats. When, you know, this festival can, you know, bring in so many people for a 7-month period. That's kind of crazy.
I think it goes a lot to do with reputation, right? Like, they started as a Shakespeare
tribute. It is a Shakespeare.
So, you know,
festival.
the classics always get people interested, and then from there you can kind of expand. I know that's a tenet a lot of companies use to try and build themselves up, is by doing shows that people can relate to or that people already know. And Shakespeare's...
Or like text, that's like a textbook.
Yeah,
thing,
like a textbook.
Something that they take their kids to.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, from what I've seen, like small towns and like smaller places, lesser known places, that's where theater is kind of the prettiest. Like, that's where you see like the actual like beauty in theater when it comes to like people just making it for like the heck of making it, not necessarily like big commercial stuff. And I think it's really great. Yeah.
And it's really inspiring to kind of see a community where, like, the community has really put in the work to lift this up, and it's given back so much to their tourism industry, to kind of all of the people who are there, and that exposure that they're getting to people from around the country, around the world, is really amazing.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's a whole thing of like tourism theater, right? Like, you put a theater company in the middle of nowhere in a beautiful place that people want to go to for a weekend, and that's how a lot of like Chautauqua runs like that, and like a lot of the theaters on like the coasts will run that way. You know, they make themselves in a location where you don't just go for the theater, but you also go because it's a beautiful area.
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to just like how this was started, and like, you know, the positive attitude that the community had about this. Like, I mean, just after reading the article, like it goes. I mean, it's hard to believe this community would exist without this type of festival in their year, just because of how much has been stitched and woven into their, you know, day-to-day lives. I mean, people talk about how they plan this all year round and how it's just consumed their entire life. And after curtain call, when people go out and, you know, the town is still alive, the cast and the crew are out with the people, talking about the experience, and, you know, talking about you know, their history, their, you know, how this came to be and whatnot. So I think I think that kind of that positive attitude that they have about it kind of encourages people, and, you know, makes people fall in love with the art that they're creating.
Yeah.
Also, with small businesses, like they boom on this stuff. They feed off this.
Yeah. It's cool to see us theater be considered, like, there are lots of small towns that have like an industry. Like, where I grew up, everyone was like a farmer, and like the soy industry was the industry that we grew up in. Like, you see this with like mining towns and things like that, where like one company or one particular industry kind of builds a whole community around it. But you don't get to see it that often with theater in the same way, so it's kind of cool to see that kind of exists too.
And somewhere that's like not big and commercial. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So my next article is called "Stage Design in Fatal Radiohead Concert Collapse Called for Parts That Didn't Exist."
Oof.
And honestly, like, this article was wild ride. It's really dramatic, to be quite honest. So it's kind of written interviewing the head of the company that was contracted to erect the stage, Dale Martin. So essentially what happened was the stage roof came tumbling down onto 33-year-old Scott Johnson, who is a Radiohead drum technician, before the show started. So apparently the stage roof design called for a 3-inch thick roof truss component that the company literally just didn't even have in its inventory. And the founder of this company, Martin, said that like it never existed, and everyone always knew that the drawings were inaccurate, which is a weird thing to read, and like that was just kind of accepted as a part of how it happened, but okay. So the engineer was told of this issue several times and was asked to remove the drawing from the plan so it could be corrected, but it really never was. And the engineer's lawyer always talks about how he absolutely disputes that claim. That's the first time they've ever heard of a faulty drawing being reported. It's just kind of like the he said sort of a thing going on. And several employees have actually come forward and testified that they put up the stage despite knowing that those parts were missing. And they just had a different part that was much smaller and obviously less strong. And apparently this is kind of the piece that was used for decades to erect several of these stages, and they never had an issue with it until now. And like a bunch of safety experts and forensic engineers actually weighed in and were talking about how absolutely insane it was that this kind of oversight happened in the first place. And that kind of deviation from what's expected in the design is like almost unheard of. And just it created a situation where the stage roof grid was not strong enough to bear the load of everything, which kind of amounted to 76,000 pounds. And so this design was originally stamped by a different engineer who is now dead of other reasons. And that engineer was involved in designing a bridge, or a scaffold on a bridge that collapsed and killed one of the people working on it in the first place. So like there are several deaths that have followed this engineer's career. And it's just kind of crazy. And the engineer on this specific project is forfeited his license after this accident pretty much. And just the conclusion of this where there were so many sloppy errors that should have been kind of taken care of at the start. And there's actually a different stage that has this exact design in Osaka, Japan, that everyone thinks is still standing, but was never confirmed as it was written in this article. So there are really a lot of questions left open by this, but it just says a lot about the safety standards and what people kind of ignore that really shouldn't be ignored. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, it's really interesting that a company would design and engineer something that they knew couldn't, they didn't have their own parts for. It just feels like something out of like a Kevin Hines lecture, like unobtainium, you know, like that they would choose to engineer, that they would choose to design the system in such a way that they needed to specifically engineer a new piece and then never got around to it or whatever the logical.
Yeah, I can see this happening in a lot of places. Like, I don't know, like you just hear about, oh, we need this in 2 weeks, or you know, we need this tomorrow, and like it's so easy to say yes, and then it can sometimes just be really, really difficult to then follow through, and like that's happens everywhere. And like I think that, you know, this happens a lot. It just doesn't end in a catastrophic failure. So like I wouldn't be surprised if you see people saying like on the job site who aren't qualified, oh, just do it, and like people, you know, and it works, and then, you know, they move on and they forget about it because they're on to the next show or whatever. But like it's these types of instances that we're like, oh shit, maybe we should actually be taking a step back and looking at like, you know, all the elements and like having the right people involved, and like sometimes it can just, a lot of things can be overlooked when you're in crunch time. And, you know, a lot of times you get lucky, but then there's always that 1 or 2 times where you're going to get
Somebody killed.
Oh,
In this case.
like yeah.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about risk assessment and like all that we've learned about it, like the idea that like you should be able to, if you're going to make a change to a system, you should be doing a risk assessment as you're making changes. Like even if they're on the fly, you should be thinking through logically, like what does this mean? What does it imply for, you know, all of the different ways that this thing can fail? And like clearly that was not done or not done well in this instance.
Something else that was interesting in this article was because this kind of was put up on federal land, and apparently no building code applied to the temporary structures erected there.
Mm-hmm.
So just like there was no one really telling them that this needs to be done in ways X, Y, and Z, and we're going to make sure it's done like that. But just those kind of oversights and those judgment calls that were made that unfortunately ended in the loss of a 33-year-old is really sad.
Yeah, and like that's kind of the reality for industry. So like everything we do is temporary structure, so a lot of the building codes don't apply, and there are standards about scenery, but none of them as robust as anyone would hope they would be, or sometimes people think they're too strict. But you know, like so safety kind of falls on us in a lot of ways to just kind of make a judgment call for ourselves about what's safe and what isn't safe and hope for the best.
Yeah, that's the one thing about the entertainment industry that's always kind of baffled my mind is like, you know, we oftentimes are doing things that, you know, can and do affect people's lives, and you know, there are rules, but, and you know, you see companies taking precautions and taking the necessary you know, precautions, whatever, but you know, that's a self-mandated thing. Like if a company is deciding that they're gonna, you know, put a safety measure into place or put some kind of regulation into effect, like that's on their own accord. That's not somebody telling them to do that. And it's always really baffled me because you have these other industries that sure are impacting people as well, but they have, you know, strict codes and strict regulations that they have to follow, whereas like we don't oftentimes even get checked on what we're doing. It just is in and out. So you know, when you have a company that's doing like getting an engineering stamp, or you know, sending it out to a firm to get you know, either done professionally or just a stamped drawing, like that's not something that's mandated, and I think, you know, that's a little scary. Especially as someone who also goes and enjoys, you know, things in the entertainment industry. It's like, oh, maybe I should think twice about standing under that truss or something.
And a lot of those codes that a company will make on itself are mostly so they don't get sued later.
Yeah, and that too. I mean, it's also like there's a lot of liability involved there, but I mean, there are still probably a lot of companies out there that try and fly under the radar that do the bare minimum just because they don't have to do anything.
Yeah, so kind of on the same vein under safety, the next article we're going to talk about is titled Trump Repeals OSHA Safety Standards. It's a bit of a misleading title because it makes it seem like all of OSHA was repealed, and that's not the case at all. It's just one particular subsection of a rule that was rolled back. On January 25th was the date, and it was sections of the Improved Tracking of Workplace Injuries and Illnesses clause. So essentially the way that it worked was that OSHA mandates that for every accident that happens in the workplace, there's a logbook kept of every accident that happens. There's an incident report done for the specific accident. And this particular subsection required that the logs and incident reports from construction companies be sent in to OSHA for a database that would then be accessible and available to workers so that you could look up what accidents had occurred at a particular workplace and like what the details were of them. And then this was enacted in 2016, like not 2016, 2014 or 2013, late Obama era. And it took a lot of fighting to get there, and it was mostly led by IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And then this was rolled back. So now companies still have to make a log of the incidents and like do an incident report, and they have to keep them on file, but they don't have to submit them to OSHA. It's only if OSHA then asks to see their files that they have to show them, usually during an on-site inspection. Or an employee can specifically request to see like a file or a series of files. But OSHA as a company is no longer collecting it, so they're no longer doing any kind of statistical surveys on which companies have, or what like the rate of accidents is per company or anything like that, or like what are typical kinds of accidents, like all that data collection and analyzation is lost. And then also the database of that is makes it more accessible to workers is lost. And there's obviously a huge pushback. The article, it comes from a union blog, so obviously it's very against these repeals. And one of the biggest so the reason that this administration has rolled back federally on this rule is they say that it doesn't protect the workers' privacy enough, because you can trace back details in the reports and pin it to a particular worker if you wanted to, because you can see basically the whole report except the name, and like they try to take out identifying information, but the government is saying it's not enough, so we're going to get rid of this entirely. But most of the union workers seem to believe that is a cover-up for just enabling companies to have more, be able to hide their workplace injuries better. The one quote at the end that's kind of crazy is that they say, we always say that OSHA rules are written in blood, somebody paid for every protection. So they're really annoyed that they fought so hard and that people, these protections save lives and that these are being rolled back. But it hasn't gone through yet because some organization, I don't remember which, filed a lawsuit immediately once the law was enacted or rolled back, and signed off, saying that it was being recalled for no reason, essentially, that the reason that they had wasn't good enough. And you legally aren't allowed to repeal policy unless you have a good reason for it. There has to be a logical and just reason, and you have to be able to prove that in a court of law. So that's eventually what this court case will lead to. Yeah, and that was kind of what the whole situation is.
The lack of accountability is just kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
It's really unsettling that is a goal for anyone.
Yeah, that's where we're moving.
This is acceptable.
I mean, I would personally like to know how many people died when I applied at a job. That's. Mm-hmm. I just feel like this is just simply a step backwards, and when it comes to OSHA, what are they accomplishing by scaling it back and making it so I get it, it's protecting companies, sort of. It kind of gives a lot of these companies free reign to do whatever they want, but I just don't think it's right.
Yeah, I think the craziest thing about all this is the way the world is moving the world is moving in towards the direction of statistical analysis and prediction, and in order to actually do that reliably, you need to have significant data.
Yeah. And
when you're then pulling the data, your interpretation, your expectations are just gonna how accurate your results are gonna be are just gonna take a massive nosedive. And by taking this away, it's just clearly gonna
And I mean, I guess for me, the excuse of protecting a worker's privacy, I mean, it is something to think about. You do want to think about retaliation, and the fact that you're making people's personal medical histories in some ways public record, even if their names aren't tied to it. And that is a scary thought, but there are better ways to go around it, or to develop systems such that you can still get the data you want and make information available to potential employees. Or
I think that there's a lot of data out there at this point in the world that's questionable.
Yeah.
And shouldn't be there. So I think, especially as the data pool starts to grow, it's just going to get more diluted, and what are the chances that you're actually going to come across somebody that you, or a situation that you recognize?
And in terms of consent, it's the union workers who would be getting injured, whose medical information would be going out in these injury reports, right? They're the people who suffer, they're the people who are getting hurt, the people who OSHA protects. So if the union is calling for this data to be available, I mean, kind of consent by proxy, right? If you join the union that is pushing for data to be available, you sort of are consenting to have your medical data available in that way, even,
Yeah.
you know, with certain protections obviously that are attended there. But I feel like there's a better way to solve this by like saying, all right, like if the union really wants this, then everyone who joins the union who works in a union job site must sign a form consenting to the fact that like parts of their medical data will be available. But that would imply that that's the actual reason they want to roll back this protection and not for other reasons.
Yeah, I think it
I
comes
just
down
don't see what the
to
big deal is. Why? Like, why would?
I mean, it just makes it easier for companies to hide.
No, I understand that. I'm just
yeah.
wondering. I'm just wondering what the big deal for OSHA or like whoever to take these data points. Like, what's the big? Like, what are they like saving millions of dollars by not willing to sell? I can't see that happening.
No, it's the article actually mentioned. I mean, again, this is a pretty biased article, so like I don't know that the statement is true because they didn't really back it up by statistic. But essentially, the active reporting, sending in the reports to OSHA is pretty cost effective because you already are required to do the reports.
Yeah.
Like sending them to OSHA is just one more step in a process, and it's a very small step at the end of a process. It's essentially sending an email. Or fill it, you know, like how we fill out incident reports here. It's a Google form. I don't think it's actually a Google form. I'm sure they've got some sort of way that they do it. It's electronic. It's supposedly very fast and very cost effective. Like you don't have to put it in snail mail or send it in triplicate or anything like that. So the idea that it's for monetary purposes that they're rolling this back also seems a little not founded. But I don't know. Yeah.
Shame.
Okay, I'm gonna change it over to something a little different than what we've been talking about. Basically, this article is titled "James Corden on the Lack of Romance and Sex Scenes for Plus Size People." And basically what this article does is it kind of jumps into body diversity and body inclusion when it comes to specifically TV and like films. In this case, not really theater or anything, but basically for TV and film, they talk about how like there's never a love scene for someone, or historically there hasn't been. Right now, the article touches on this, but like there has been shows in the recent past that have had plus size actors, that have had sex scenes, that have had romantic partners, and that are treated just like anyone else. But mostly what it focuses on is the history of it, and basically he kind of talks about a lot of like the fat person being seen as like the joke. Like they're hired to make a joke here and there. They're not hired for any sex appeal, and how like at some point, though that they're still getting work, it's turning into being offensive because it's an industry with a lot of people that preach like being comfortable with your own skin, being comfortable with how you look, and then they go ahead and say, but if you are this size, like you're pigeonholed to these things, but we still love you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was basically that in a nutshell.
This is something that I just like, I can never wrap my head around the kind of like how there are so many like people who are out there saying how they're all body positive and they're all inclusive and everyone is, you know, different and beautiful and wonderful in their own ways, but then this happens. It like, I will never understand how that kind of juxtaposition happens in a person's mind. It's, I don't know if it's them saying, well, this is someone higher up saying this isn't marketable, which is wrong in a whole bunch of other ways.
Yes.
But like, it's just like, and you see so many things nowadays that are like body positive and plus as inclusive that are doing so well.
Yeah.
That are like, everyone loves them because they're seeing themselves on the screen, they're seeing the world they actually live in on that screen, and I just don't get why this gap still exists.
I feel like at this point the world has pretty much proven that diversity is something people are willing to pay for, and you know, in all forms, including like body diversity and body positivity, and like economically, like, it makes no sense to want to shirk away from that at this point in this climate. And I get that the American market is not the biggest market that American content is being created for, because, I mean, obviously entertainment is the country's largest export, and there's a whole bunch of different reasons why, there's a whole bunch of different markets that are much larger than consuming our own media, but, I think at this point we've proven time and time again that diversity will be bought and consumed at the same, if not a greater rate. So, I don't understand why companies aren't just jumping on board with it. At this point, it makes no sense.
Yeah, I think, the interesting thing here is that, he captures, he looks at it from, a very, taboo sense. Because, yes, you could say yes to everything else. You could say yes to, plus-size clothing. You could say yes to every aspect of having, a plus-size person be around you. Mm-hmm. That's very easy, but I think that what he's pointing out is basically that a lot of people draw the line. I don't want to see naked though. That's that's where it goes too far.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is here he's just saying that you can do that, but you're gonna be judged and you're gonna be treated badly for it, especially if you get older. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I get that line exists for some people, but I think that that's being blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
Because we also thought that there would be a line at diverse lead characters. The line would be at that we've clearly proven that taboo isn't actually as strong of a proponent in our society as we thought. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this is the same way. It's just a risk that somebody in the entertainment industry has to be willing to take.
Yeah.
And you have to just kind of trust that the way that the culture is shifting in your consumers is that they will embrace it and not reject it. And there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that we aren't getting close to there as a society,
Moving on to our next article. This one is about the World Theater Day. And basically this is kind of a day that was instituted in 1961 by the International Theater Institute. It's on March 27th. It's kind of celebrated across the globe. Different parts of the world, different communities celebrate it differently, I'm assuming, but essentially it's kind of just a celebration of the art, which is really cool. This year it was on disconnection, but it drops this word disconnection all over the article, but I think it's kind of up for your interpretation. It basically talks about how over the years, especially in this climate, in this day and age, we're telling stories, retelling stories, about society, about politics, about the world, and the context of that in kind of the human disconnection, which I think is cool. I still really kind of struggle to. I think I would be interested to hear what you think the article, or kind of what your interpretation of my 5-minute or 5-second synopsis of the article is. But it kind of just talks about how theater offers a space for multiple voices to coexist. Explore the complexities of living in a space, the space, the world, whatever, connecting to the world.
Well, it seems like it's kind of trying to hit on the idea that we don't have to all be the same to be a community or to come together. I remember when I was in school and stuff, people always called America the Great American Melting Pot, and then halfway through our education they switched that to the Great American Salad Bowl or something like that, right? Because they didn't want it to make it seem like everyone was all melted together to be the same. That people could be into individuals but complement each other, and I think that's kind of you should be embracing the things that make you not connect with other people, the things that you don't understand about them, the things that are like the disconnections. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think we take theater for granted being where we are, really. I think, like, you see people that, like, don't have in their lives that do it for fun. Like, they actually do it not for any paycheck, not for anything. And I think that things like this is for them, but it's also a good reminder to us, kind of, to, like, reevaluate what we're doing and why we got into it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like, it's one of those where like every day is National Theater Day for us or whatever. You know, like we all are in it so much.
We're thinking
and, like,
about it all the time.
Like every once in a while we'll be sitting in a class and like someone will share a profound thought on what theater means to them and we'll go, oh, okay. But like this is like one of those times where we actually get to think about what it actually means to us, and having a kind of theme with every year actually helps us kind of connect to a specific part of it that we're grateful for, that we appreciate. That's really actually a kind of good thing for all of us to get a little bit of perspective.
Yeah, there's like this line in here that says theater contributes to healing society, to healing the society. Which, like, I mean,
Sure,
it's
actually,
kind of a bold statement.
I actually don't like that. Like, I really, like, there's all these people in the world that are like, yeah, theater changes the world. Like, we really, like what we're doing here is gonna, like, make a difference. I think that, sure, you can think that there's a difference that's gonna be made. But really, at the end of the day, I think that the only thing that it could shift is the culture, but not even the full culture, like the culture of people that watch theater, which is
I think the coolest thing about theater is that it's like always going to be like it's an interpretation of you know,
Where we are right now.
of where we
Yeah.
are, yeah, and like people are going to then interpret that art. So like,
Yeah.
it's not. I mean, like yes, we're telling a story. Like yes, we're reflecting on the past, but like that also is still being interpreted by today's people. So like it's still going to be taken for what it is now, how that is. So I think it's still important to realize that like maybe that's what they mean by disconnection. But yeah, cool article. I think like it's definitely an uplifting, positive article. Whereas like we've looked at some, maybe some more dark and grim articles. So yeah.
Oh, am I? You're only two? Oh, okay. So my last article is The Importance of the National Endowment for the Arts. This is an article that just basically talks about, it's a transcript from a meeting, and it basically just talks about the point of the NEA and the economic contributions of the NEA to society, and it's, I'm assuming it's a plea for support at the end of the day, but there really isn't a lot about like a goal with the information that's given. It kind of explains like what the NEA is and what it does. So essentially the NEA is primarily it's a grant supporting agency, and the article goes into a lot of depth about how the NEA is one of the biggest return on investments in the federal government. Like every $1 given out by the NEA returns $9 to the economy or something like that. And it also goes on, it has a very interesting section in the article where it talks about how the NEA is the perfect example of a conservative government organization because it has been slashed to pieces so small and so tiny that its overhead cost is incredibly low. 80% of its profits are mission related, not overhead related. So like 80% of the funding it gets goes out to support other like arts organizations. Yeah. And that the NEA is the single largest reaching arts organization. So it not only does it hit affect organizations in all 50 states, but it gets through it affect they give out grants in 439 counties in the country too. Like every county has in the entire country has an organization that is funded in part by the NEA. And so, the article kind of goes into both of those details. And it basically is like you think that the NEA could be replaced by private spending, but there's no one private organization that has as far-reaching of a economic impact as we do, or as significant as one, with the same return on investment in terms of overhead cost. Yeah.
Honestly, I forget about the NEA sometimes. Sometimes I feel like arts organizations are all funded by like the old rich people that like write a check, and like it's always kind of strikes me how impactful the NEA is, but we like very rarely actually hear about any sort of dealing with them.
Yeah.
Just kind of an odd thing, but you know.
I think we also tend to focus our studies here are focused on commercial or for-profit, which the NEA just doesn't really fund in the same way. But you know, like I also forget about the NEA. I'm like, oh yeah, there's an entire government agency dedicated to funding arts programs. But yeah, all right. Somehow,
a lot of times I feel like the government just doesn't like believe in the arts. There's that whole thing where like, I mean, it's like always the first thing to get cut.
Yeah.
So like in my head, it's just always the thing that they don't really support or care about.
I think it's like that you can do this on your own time type of thing. Like, why do we need to?
Which is so interesting because like more and more we're seeing how. I mean, a lot of people make the argument that the entertainment and the arts is the last great U.S. economic export, and like it's like the one thing that kind of makes our country unique in terms of what we produce is arts and culture and entertainment, which you know covers both the for-profit and not-for-profit sector. So it's just I just am so interested as to why it's not considered a bigger investment by the government in that way. But I don't know. I guess maybe they focus more of those efforts in the for-profit sector, which actually makes a profit, which makes sense. You know, but
Okay.
Well, clearly other government agencies should be like learning how they're handling their own management if their overhead costs are so low.
Yeah.
Comparatively, like that sounds like something we should be paying more attention to.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, I'm gonna move on. Basically, the one that I was looking at is called "After Overture Cancels Miss Saigon Panel, Asian American Scholars Host Teach-In on Street." So basically, the Miss Saigon, the Broadway production of Miss Saigon is currently on tour right now, and it's in Madison, Wisconsin. And so this article basically like follows the protests that happened outside of Miss Saigon, and this is a conversation that's been happening since this show was written in 1990. Like, basically, the conversation is that like the show perpetuates like Asian women as property, like Asian men as weak and violent, and a white savior complex. And basically, that's just the show. That really is the show. Like, it has pretty music, yes. It's like it'll like break your heart, yes. But with all of that, it also has like very clear, written out problems that is embedded into the show. Like, you cannot do Miss Saigon without perpetuating like a statutory rape like fetish, or perpetuating a white savior complex. And basically what the article did was they kind of talked about both sides of it, because another side of the argument that is that it's given so many Asian American or Asian actors the opportunity to work in a show as Asian characters, and or at least now it does. Like, this production actually has Asian people. Like the first one didn't really do it that well, but yeah, and also like it kind of also dived in on how any show that has like Mikado, King and I, any show that has anything that has to do with Asian people has been just turned into like this stereotype and like this joke of a show.
It's interesting that it's always phrased as like giving like a chance to Asian American actors, and it's like that's the chance that they're having. Like, this isn't one of them, because this is any good that you argue it's doing just as much, if not more bad.
Yeah.
Like it's perpetuating all of the things that we are actively trying to get away from and rise above.
And it's 2019. There are better shows.
Better.
There are just better shows. Like, wait, I open a textbook, you can find like 4.
I
Like-
will say, I saw the show on Broadway, and I really I like the show. Technically, an achievement. It like the helicopter, gorgeous, but you really can't get past this. Like this is something that you just cannot kind of shake off. And the more you think about it, the more you realize more things. Like I didn't even realize the statutory rape part until like a year later after watching the show. And I was like, oh fuck. I mean,
She starts the show saying she's like
another
16
one.
years old.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, like it's kind of, it was a cute stepping stone for when the world thought that was a progressive moment.
Yeah.
And we're past that now, so we gotta move on. Stop producing it. We're
Yeah.
good. There's a reason we don't produce certain old shows anymore. And sometimes it's just because they're bad. But sometimes it's because they're really bad. And
Detrimental to
it's the same-
society.
yeah. I mean, I don't know, in the same way that people's music tastes change, and so we don't produce No-No-No-Net as much anymore because
Yeah.
no one likes the music now. It's the same thing. We moved on. Let's
It's
move on.
it's a demeaning show.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah. Okay. That was my last article. Do you have any more? I think that was 10. That's 10.
Yeah, that's 10.
It's been fun.
Okay, this has been great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Catch us next week.